Hi, Wolf Practitioners. So here we are again for the second section of the Expert 10 Minutes together with Tim Richardson from Iter Consulting, talking about reshoring and nearshoring. So in the first section, we covered the basics, really, what nearshoring and reshoring is all about, how this set of strategy increases resilience and efficiency in supply chain and responsiveness, of course. And now, actually, we want to talk about a slightly different facet of the topic. In fact, we want to go a little bit deeper, looking at challenges and success stories. So, in particular, Tim, I would like to start from what you think are the most common challenges that companies face when shifting towards reshoring or nearshoring.
I think there are many. I think one is clarity about not always having clarity about what they're trying to achieve. So I think we've had supply issues from Asia for all the reasons that we've known for the last few years. So therefore bringing it back is good, but not necessarily being clear whether it's about ensuring service or whether it's about kind of balancing cost, improving working capital position, or just giving a penetration into a marketplace. So I think there's quite often really not good, I think, strategic thinking about the purpose. I would see as one of the main obstacles I see. I think the second factor is then the quite often people don't recognize the complexity of the supply chain they are, as a consequence, creating, particularly about how do you manage, control and plan and prioritize on a global basis, whereas rather than having something all in one place, you've now got it in multiple places. So how do you balance the demand between the environments? So if you've got one factory in one environment that's in one area that's very busy, and yet you've got another one that's much less busy, but it's a higher cost environment, how do you keep that balance? How do you keep that control to meet the needs of the market, but secondly, do it at the lowest overall cost into your business? So I think there's a much more complex environment to create, to actually build. And I think organisationally that has real challenges as well, because I think you now need both technology that can span and control it globally, but you need probably a higher capability of demand supply planning team that are able to take those calls, and actually they then sit at above the individual factories and organisations. So I think you are in many ways disempowering some organisations in terms of how they're structured, but you're disempowering the factories to make the decisions about what and how they make, because you are making those decisions for them. So they become very much more black box type entities that will tell you what to do. You just do it. That's you don't need to worry about any of the other issues. And I was actually just talking to somebody I've known for many years in the pharmaceutical industry, and he was kind of saying two businesses come together. One is used factory direct ship to its customers, another one goes through a structured distribution network. Bringing everything into the structured distribution network was really cultural issues, because they're still saying, well, we used to ship direct to customers, what can we do in order to make our customer service better? Not really perceiving their role as diminished in many ways, and now what they're responsible for is they get a plan of what's required. It needs to be in the distribution network by a certain date. That's where their responsibility ends. So I think there's a rebalancing of organisational authorities and responsibilities. So I think it's a complex organisational change in order to do that, and that has to be underpinned by systems that can work on a global basis. So the challenges are as much about balance and control and authority and the culture of the organisation to support that. Complexity of working across all the multiple time zones, but in an integrated way. So I think it gets increasingly complicated the more deeply you think about it.
I mean, I'm sure you despite all the challenges, you must have seen probably some successful implementations, successful cases. So, I mean, without necessarily disclosing names,
no, I wouldn't do that.
But can you share some of this, so like success stories? What was really instrumental to the success to begin with?
Okay. I mean, it's kind of almost a mirror image of what I've just said in terms of some of the issues, because they are the people that have kind of started to address or have finished addressing these issues. So, for example, we have a client who works in the vacuum industry, particularly feeding into semiconductors, and their business is now, it has always been a global business, but it's been global, but actually very controlled as a series of islands. So the islands have all worked independently. So by putting in a global integrated supply chain planning system across that, what they've been able to do is to align and integrate right from an S&OP level, right the way through all the execution phases are much more tightly integrated supply chain. So some of the consequences of moving things into a more global operation are easily understood and are able to be visualized and seen and managed centrally. So it's given them a greater visibility, and they've got a few very big, very demanding customers who create a very volatile demand, and it's allowed them to understand the consequences of changes much more quickly and be able to understand how they can mitigate some of the impacts on a global scale. So redirect manufacturing from, we're going to make this part in this factory, but now actually we're going to make it in this factory because that's the expedient way, and I'll understand what the cost implications of that are to me as a business, and therefore what it's doing to my margin. So you're making a much more balanced decision about cost and service and meeting the needs of the customer. So I think that's a really good example. I mean, they are on that journey rather than ended that journey. So that's kind of one good example. But that's a high margin, very complex, very sophisticated business. So I think there's other examples, much more simple. A food manufacturer who are making long-term. It's things with long shelf life, so it's not very short shelf life goods. But certainly in the times when cost of moving freight was moving things around, they were able to change their freight modes to actually kind of, rather than everything done through containers, they were able to bulk ship because they had the scale, and basically move product around the world to keep all of their facilities operating in a more effective way. And that gave them a really sizable competitive advantage in a number of marketplaces, because most of their competitors didn't have the scale or sophistication to do that. It also showed some of the frailties, because it was a group of companies that weren't working in an integrated way, so the coordination was kind of much more challenging. But being able to change the freight mode and being able to move things around created some challenges, but it also gave them a really strong competitive advantage, which they've leveraged, and they've kind of, even as freight prices, I know they've gone back up again, but in the very recent past, but as they were coming back down to more normal levels, they managed to maintain most of the advantage that they created over the intervening period.
Great. And you mentioned, the consequences and the cost consequences. You mentioned about relationships. I think when we talk about relationship, and we don't have really time to get into that, but having been in these discussions myself very often, I've seen the impact also on the internal network could be quite dramatic at times, because obviously you start shifting volumes and you start shifting responsibilities, P&L. So that's certainly part of the challenge. But in any case, we'll get back to this in the next session. So thanks a lot for this insightful overview, Tim, because in the next and last bit of our interview, we'll get to look into the future outlook and technological advancements, and what is effectively an enabler today to make the strategies more possible than they used to be before. So Tim, thank you so much for this
You're more than welcome.
10 minutes.
Yep.
And I'll talk to you in the next round.
Okay, sounds great.